Kevin Costner's Horizon just might be the most ambitious movie undertaking since Lord of the Rings. Think about it. Kevin Costner sunk a huge chunk of his own personal fortune into making an epic Western saga, with a second movie only weeks away from hitting theaters regardless of whether or not the first one makes him any money. If that weren't enough, he's already started shooting pieces of the third film, and he's sworn that he'll also be making a fourth movie as well. Given the scope of his ambitions, it's hard to truly judge Horizon Chapter 1 as a standalone, with it clearly part of a much bigger whole. Running 3 hours, with credits, Costner, who also directed, produced, and co-wrote the film with John Baird, has to do a lot of setup here, with much of the movie devoted to establishing the many characters the saga is built around. Costner himself, who is front and center in the advertising, is only one such character, with him only entering the film about an hour in and having no more screen time than any of the other major roles. Even if it is largely a movie setting up further, presumably more action-packed installments in the Horizon saga, it's nevertheless the kind of compelling old-fashioned epic they simply don't make anymore. Most directors that dip their toe into Western cinema nowadays, rare as it is, can't help but emulate Sergio Leone or Sam Peckinpah, who seem to be kind of the more hip Western movie makers to the next crop of directors that are coming up. Costner's influences, however, go back further than that, to John Ford and Howard Hawks. Ford's Cavalry trilogy, which is comprised of Fort Apache, She Wore a Yellow Ribbon, and Rio Grande, seem to be particularly heavy influences, especially on the parts of the film centering around Sam Worthington's army officer and his romance with a young widow played by Sienna Miller. It's a risky move, as many younger moviegoers, whom Costner will have to appeal to in order for this to turn a profit, don't really have the kind of movie making in their cinematic vocabulary, as he really does embrace a more classic style. Yet, for those willing to go along for the ride and maybe tolerate the occasional bit of obnoxious humor, something that John Ford was guilty of in a lot of his movies, or schmaltz complete with violin on the soundtrack, you may find that by the time the credits roll, you'll be hungry to continue this journey with Costner and his well-chosen cast, with the movie even ending with an action-packed trailer for the second film. Costner plays Hayes Ellison, a wandering saddle tramp very much in the mold of the Western heroes once played by Gary Cooper or James Stewart, but not John Wayne, with him a much lower-key character. He finds himself defending a young prostitute, played by Abby Lee, who's named Marigold, who has inadvertently found herself the caregiver for a young child, which puts the forced-together family in the crosshairs of a vicious clan headed by Leave No Trace's Dale Dickey and her demented son, played by Stranger Things' Vecna, Jamie Campbell Bower. But, once again, he's only a small part of the story, with just as much time devoted to Sienna Miller's Frances, who loses her husband and son in an opening massacre sequence, and along with her remaining daughter, winds up living at a cavalry outpost manned by Sam Worthington's upstanding First Lieutenant Gephardt, who, along with his earthy Sergeant Riordan, played by Michael Rooker, who seems to be channeling the type of Irish non-coms played by Victor McLaglen in the Ford movies, takes an interest in the young widow. You really do invest in all these characters, even those who don't get a ton of screen time, such as Jenna Malone in a small but critical role as a hard-bitten pioneer woman. Danny Houston also is great as a seen-it-all cavalry colonel, and perhaps best of all, surprisingly, is the great Jeff Fahey as a sadistic scalp hunter who, in a really standout scene, tries to make the young survivor of a massacre into a monster. This brings me to how Costner handles the whole idea of manifest destiny as previously depicted in classic westerns. Anyone who's seen Dances with Wolves can tell you that Costner is very aware of how complex a tale it is. He spends quite a bit of time taking on the indigenous perspective here, with the movie bookended by atrocities, one committed against the white settlers and another committed on the native population. Both are given their appropriate weight. The fact is, Costner has spent decades making westerns and refining his take on the material to make Horizon, and anyone who slams this as simplistic in its perspective actually hasn't seen the movie. And as we're only getting one piece of the story right now, it's hard to say definitively what he has or hasn't accomplished. Visually, Costner, who shoots in his favorite flat aspect ratio rather than scope, makes the most of his gorgeous Utah scenery. Anyone who thought this would look like a TV series should really think again. It's also bright. I love looking at a movie that's bright, whereas most directors and cinematographers these days tend to shroud their films in darkness. Horizon does not do that. Also, John Debney contributes a deliberately old-school, full orchestral musical score, which maybe lacks the power of John Barry's exquisite music for Dances with Wolves, but proves to be an effective engine to drive the movie forward. However, it can't be denied that, as it is, Horizon feels like the appetizer before a main course, with it doing so much heavy lifting in terms of setup that you do walk out of the movie feeling a little bit like you've only gotten part of the experience. As such, I feel like the movie will probably fare better once more installments come out, but I still found myself thoroughly engaged from beginning to end. I'll say this, if Part 2 was open right now, as soon as the credits rolled, I would have marched right into the second film. And I'm really eager to see what Costner has in store for us as the saga goes on. So right now I give this a 7 out of 10, but in hindsight, once I watch other installments, I might have to go back and grade this a little bit higher.